Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Raven, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today, we're going to have another very interesting show. I have invited on to join me Dr. Samarpan Anand Buchalter, who is a chiropractor. I'll tell you a little bit about him in a moment. And what he's doing, and the reason we're having him on today, is because he's working with an indigenous group in Brazil that is being pummeled, literally, raped, pillaged, plundered by the Brazilian government. And it's a very sad story. Unfortunately, it's a story that has been repeated throughout the Amazon rainforest, from Ecuador to Peru to Brazil, all over. And here is one of the heroes who is tackling that with a big heart, who sees the plight, who sees the destruction of an ancient culture and is seeking to do something about it. So we wanted to have him on to discuss just what he's doing, and so we can all learn more about what it is that's taking place and perhaps some of what we can do about it. So a little bit about Dr. Samarpan Anand Buchalter. He's a doctor of chiropractic, a yoga teacher trained in the Indian Himalayan mountains, and an indigenous healthcare advocate who has worked in the Amazon rainforest intermittently for almost a decade. After years of human rights advocacy, he has had the great honor of being nominated as a healthcare ambassador for the isolated Yanomami people of the upper Rio Negro region of Brazil. Dr. Buchalter is developing sustainable healthcare initiatives aimed at addressing the effects of colonization on isolated indigenous cultures, such as malnutrition, musculoskeletal pain, and other ailments now plaguing remote villages. His work shines light on the unprecedented atrocities that have been perpetuated against the Amazon and its inhabitants, while serving as a cultural bridge between worlds and as a messenger for those whose voices never leave the forest. Interestingly, the Yanomami Healthcare Sovereignty Project is the culmination of his own healing journey after breaking his back twice and suffering a near-death experience from a traumatic brain injury. The depths of disability he experienced forced him on a path of radical immersion into holistic healing modalities, taking him to every corner of the globe in search of a deeper understanding of what it truly means to heal. So that's just so beautiful, Summer. I really so appreciate it. And, you make a very important point there, which is that as we seek to heal others, we are also simultaneously healing ourselves. There are a number of reasons for that. One is there's really actually only one being anyway. So what looks like other is really I, as I and thou, the work of Buber really describes. But it's also in alignment with the ancient archetype type of the wounded healer, that in order to heal others, and it's very much part and parcel and intrinsic to the shamanic tradition, that to heal others, one needs to have suffered pain, injury, illness, which not only teaches them about the mechanisms of healing, but also the mindset and, if you will, the heart set. It teaches empathy, to be able to connect with the person you're seeking to provide the healing services to. So I know you know that, and yet still I wanted to articulate that for our audience and for all of us. It's always good to be reminded. So thanks for being a guest today. And I'd love to just first learn a little bit about you and how you got connected to the Yanomami people and to indigenous culture all over.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much, Mitchell. That was a beautiful introduction. And I love your reflections on, just some of the archetypes that are present already just in the story. One of the things that I think can be reflected back is, knowledge is to know something as an objective viewer. There's a little bit of space between you and the experience or the person or the thing that you're looking at. But wisdom is to be looking from the inside out. You're putting yourself into the essence and merging with it. Like Ram Dass uses the word grok, so to grok it. And
I do too. I think it comes from Star Trek.
Yeah, I love that term.
I use it all the time.
Yeah. So to really grok it, to understand it, and from that, that's where wisdom comes. So there's an empathy component to wisdom that I feel like knowledge is a little bit distant from. So yeah, so basically it's been a wild journey, and of course it must be because it's in the Amazon, but
yeah,
my journey started way back in around 2014, 2015, whenever I discovered the first ever World Indigenous Games. It was the Olympic Games for all of the tribes of the world, and it was the first time ever that they had really gotten this wide of a geographic scope involved, to where we had tribes all the way from New Zealand, like the Maori people, all over Northern Europe, Africa, throughout the Amazon, North American continent. Every single continent essentially was represented. And while I was there, I had the beautiful privilege of being a personal assistant and a translator for the Maori people in the Native American delegation. And that led to me being introduced to tribes in the Amazon. I was invited by a tribe in Xingu called the Iwalapaji people and the Kwikuru people to go and stay with them in their village and experience their community. I've been there 2 times now, and I'm due for another return trip back. My friends keep calling me to remind me to come back home soon. And in that process, I got introduced to a family that is also an ecotourism business called Amazon Emotions. My friends are the official ecotourism partners of the Yanomami people, helping them create sustainable initiatives based off of their to be able to essentially protect their culture and their land by using it as a way to monetize and profit from the situation that they're in. And they are climbing the Yaripo, which is one of the largest mountains in South America that's on their territory. And so they were the the bridge, so to speak, between the Yanomami and myself. And whenever they discovered that I was a doctor, I got to stay. The president of the Yanomami came and stayed in our property for about a week, along with one of their other project leaders. And we got to really dive deep, going into ceremony and really understanding the possibilities available to our connection, which led to me being invited to help reform their healthcare system and discover new and sustainable alternatives to the things that they're experiencing. And it culminated to where I went back to their lands in June of this past year, 2021, where I got to speak at the Ayurka Yanomami Assembly, which was the first one since the pandemic started. So there was all of the leaders of all the major communities in that region, which is around a population of about 10,000 to 12,000 people. And I got to speak my intentions of dedicating myself to discovering this, the underlying cause of some of the major ailments plaguing their society, such as malnutrition, musculoskeletal pain, and other ailments like the proliferation of malaria and flu. So it's been an unfolding process as I've been
journey.
Granted this access. So
what's ironic, of course, and the Samarpan, is that left to themselves, the indigenous people tend to be extraordinarily healthy and robust. If you think about that habitat, they have to be, in order to deal with all of the natural challenges. And by and large, they don't know about Western medical pathologies. They don't typically have cancer or other issues that plague our Western lifestyles, and it's only when there is the introduction of Western dietary habits and other habits, including alcohol and drugs, that these otherwise powerfully robust people start to deteriorate and degenerate, and not only that, they're living in the world's greatest pharmacopoeia, the Amazon rainforest. I just came back myself a little while ago from Ecuador, Vilcabamba, where we had the great honor of meeting with the Kogi,
Mm,
and received blessings. And it was an extraordinary experience. And
wow.
they don't even know their own age. Once they hit what we would call around the 90s, they just keep going. And what's interesting is this one spiritual teacher we were with had totally jet black hair,
Yeah.
not a gray hair in on his head. And we asked him how old he is. He said, I'm not really sure. I was somewhere 92, 94. Some say I'm about 102.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's such a different headset, and you're having the opportunity to be of service to such people and bring that wisdom back here as well as into your own body and do them such a great service because, as I said in the introduction, which I've learned from you and from living, that the governments all over the Amazon, Peruvian, Ecuadorian, Brazilian, etc., really are pummeling and destroying these incredible indigenous cultures. So, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's colonization is something that I feel like people might have a perception of it being a term of antiquity, like that, the ships arrived and we just set up our cities and, we kind of just, after a certain point, we stopped that process. However, it is very much prevalent to this day, and has to be very sneaky because there is now such an immediate means of being able to share different actions and different atrocities perpetuated against indigenous people because of the internet, because of this interconnected global network that we have. So some of the acts of colonization actually come off in the form of what would seem as beneficial policies for them. So I'll give you an example with healthcare specifically. It's they have now experienced a level of disease that they never had before. A lot of these, especially the pandemic, hit them very hard. So whenever you have these different healthcare advocates from organizations like CISAI in Brazil that are essentially branches of the health ministry that are used to essentially go into the communities and provide medical care, what they're not addressing, unfortunately, is the underlying cause, which is the system that is encroaching on them. And so whenever you're going into these different villages, no matter what your intentions are, if there's not a component of education and there's not a component of looking into the environmental aspects of what's happening, I mean, just, there's over 20,000 illegal gold miners in the Yanomami territory in this very moment, and a lot of them are bringing in drugs, bringing in violence, and contaminating the rivers with mercury because that's part of their gold mining processing. If you're not addressing these grander systemic invasions into not only their territory, but to their cultural psyche, it's going to end up being short-sighted. You're treating symptoms instead of causes, and you're going to perpetuate a false narrative that you need us in order to stay healthy. In fact, we are the reason why you're unhealthy in the first place, but we are trying to essentially put out the fires that we're causing as we go. So it's a very interesting, complex, interrelated thing. And that's why malnutrition is so unique, because it's not just that they are vitamin deficient. It's not just that, they don't have the same food they once had. Their whole culture has shifted because of the introduction of the outside forces around them. Basically, there's a lot of different ways to anthropologically identify and categorize different indigenous people. And the Yanomami people have been very forest-based instead of river-based for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning they weren't historically the ones to build canoes and go paddling around. They were deeper in the forest, and their communities were in big circular houses that they would grow to a certain level, maybe 100, 200 people. At some point, things would kind of get a little bit tense and they would fission off and make these new groups and spread out. And each time they would do that, they would explore new territory. They would build out gardens that had, staging of tiers when the fruits and vegetables be ready. They would have new access to game. And they would, every once in a while, essentially change territories.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the introduction of the missionaries that went out there and the military, they have gravitated towards the riverbanks and they have stayed there because that's where the access to new materials, metal tools and such like that became readily available. So that desire to have those things shifted them from the deep interior more towards these more accessible waterways. Their villages stayed and growed and grew and grew. The patterns of the way that their women are having children have changed because the nomadic nature would kind of make it to where they would wait a little bit longer and those gestational periods would be spaced out further. And so it typically takes anywhere from 1.5 to 2 years, ideally, for a woman's body to fully recover and be ready to receive a new child. And they're having baby after baby after baby and being incentivized by the government to do so financially. And where you're going to spend that money is going to be in the city. You're going to have to get a boat. You see the system here. So
yes, definitely.
Did
they have their own form of currency inside their own people and culture?
I'm sure on some level there's always trade,
Always trade, sure.
Yeah, so there's, if they would catch wild game, if they had arrows or bows or tobacco to trade, but it wasn't so much, from what I've come to understand, it wasn't so much transactional as it was like, I'll give you this and I know at some point it's going to come back to me. And
communal.
Yeah, exactly. And whenever someone,
familial in the
exactly. Yeah, and whenever there was food, everybody had food, and the men were responsible for hunting, the women would, work the gardens. There was this shared mutual reliance between everybody that ensured that if someone was in lack, that there would be some way for them to be able to continue living until they could be back on their feet and abundant to be able to return the favor.
Samarpan, you make a good point about the way we tend to think about colonialization as something of the past, i.e., when the Spaniards came, when the Portuguese came to South America, to the Caribbean, to Central America, to North America, right? And it happened then. But the point you're making is that this is a living reality that is going on today, which is encroachment, to put it gently, on indigenous people. The Kogi simply left. They just got out of Dodge and went up into the mountains of Colombia. And they actually avoided really virtually all of the colonization and allowed in Western culture just in the past, I don't know, 20 or 30 or 40 years, at their pace, where they learned about electricity, they learned about the cell phone, they learned about the computer, but they did it in a way that they could integrate to some extent. And it's not much, by the way. They way prefer their own way of life to what we have. And for me, that was a really interesting experience to think, oh, you really don't want electricity? And well, the answer was not really, So we also, what you're doing and what we're talking about undermines assumptions that we make about what other people want. On the other hand, I remember being involved in a company called Amazon Herb Company with a man named John Easterling, who also saw the other side. He was gifting the Amazon people who produced herbs for him. And he said that many of them really wanted the technological conveniences that we have today, that we shouldn't think that they only want their way of life. So like any other different cultural mix, you're going to get people who want one thing and others that want to preserve a way of life. But that notwithstanding, what you're doing to protect the people is outstanding and beautiful, because it's both cultural, as I understand, but it's also personal, biological, personal health. So take a moment, if you would, and first, please feel free to respond to that. But I also want to hear about your own journey and what you personally went through that brought you, in a sense, karmically and dharmically to this moment where you feel that you really want to dedicate a good part of your life to their healing.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of beauty there. Thank you for sharing that. I am aware of the fact that there is a tendency to over romanticize indigenous people at times, and essentially, like, like you're saying, there are factions of people in every community that are going to think different than some of the leaders might, and every generation's different, and the more that there is the
Right.
exposure, the more things are going to change naturally. um, and I think that one of the things that I rediscovered for myself that I think is something that might need to be, that is part of my idea of how I'm going to approach this project, is articulating what could be lost by essentially becoming very comfortable. And I the thing that is very interesting, there's a feeling in your brain when you go there, like, and it's directly deep inside of your conditioned, domesticated indoor cat brain, that when you are there and you see these people just performing a ritual or just existing, there's something about you that feels like it's going to break, because it has been built on such a fragile foundation of essentially that the ultimate deception that comfort equals happiness.
Oh,
And you are confronted with the reality of what it means to be primarily connected to your inner human essence. And whenever I was in the rainforest, I was there for 6 months last year, and I spent a lot of time deep in the rainforest with some of my dear indigenous friends, and getting to go to their community and to be primarily connected to your elements, to have fire as a daily part of your life, to feel the rain on your face, to feel the wind over the trees and the fragrances of the flowers it brings. There's something that I
oh,
feel like we've been robbed of as we have succumbed to the desires of our comfort levels. And I pray that.
beautifully put. Beautifully put.
Thank
Truly.
you.
I,
Yeah.
I'm feeling like I'm breathing the fresh Amazonian air and the dewdrops. So
Yeah.
please go on.
Yeah, and just like a kind of example, that with the Mongolians, with Genghis Khan, they talk about the steppe people. The steppe people were essentially the wild people that he encompassed the territories of, and they were the ones that were riding on horseback, bareback, shooting 165-pound bows mid-flight, hitting a bird, drinking the blood out of the neck of their horses, and they were like considered superhuman. And they were by just about any other standard, and they would slowly capture different villages, and they would take over the village in victory, and then they would slowly kind of get comfortable, and they'd lose that part of themselves that made them so connected to the present moment, so present, so just superhuman, in the sense that they were so adapted to their environment. And the Yanomami people reflect that back to me in the ways that they've just honed their ecology, their biology, to reflect what is most needed in this present moment, is my ability to climb, run, hunt, smell, feel, taste. All of it is just so sharp. And it's like, if you took away one of your senses, all the others would be heightened. But what if you used all of your senses to the fullest capacity that's actually biologically available to you? And you combine that with the deep integrated understanding of spirituality that is an essential part of our humanity, that has also been numbed out because of our desire to modernize. And the Yanomami people use an hallucinogenic powder called parika. That's the Portuguese word for it. And these shaman go under tremendous rites of initiation to be able to go to this plane of reality that is essentially on our own, and be able to interact with these spirits to help heal their community. And there's very interesting archetypes in shamanism that are reflected globally, no matter if you're in Siberia or Africa or the Amazon basin. And there's these rites of initiation and archetypes that just are glaring at you in the face to show that, again, these are not just Amazonian indigenous isolated traits. These are human traits.
Oh, yes.
And so I think really what's at stake here is, if we lose these people who essentially represent an egoic threat to the very basis of where our society is structured upon, which is the false idea of scarcity, we would lose our connection to our primal human essence, which would bring us back into harmony with our environment, with each other. And again, it's not to say that there's still not the human element, which is there could be conflict and whatever, but
Sure.
there's at least that grounded understanding that we are here together, and this is our home, and it's something to be taken care of.
Absolutely. No, you're putting this very beautifully. And there's what indigenous people for us all represent, having nothing to do with human conflict that exists everywhere on one level or another. It's not an issue of conflict. We all have hormones running through us. You know, we have what we call good days and not so good days. You know, everyone has their own interpretation of reality moment to moment. So it's not that there are conflicts, it's how do we then resolve those conflicts? How do we, there's always going to be a wound, as you so well know, we all know. And it's not a question of whether there will be one, it's more like when and how do I resolve it? How do I heal it? Which is what so much of your and our journey is about. So you're describing that primordial relationship that the Yanomami and all indigenous people represent to us in our larger body of humanity is something so precious and so sacred that we have lost such touch with as Western cultural habituated people about, like you mentioned, comfort and our equating comfort with happiness or well-being, when that sharpness of sensory awareness, of that ability to climb trees and dart quickly in the forest and play and romp like animals. That's, we are animals.
Yeah.
I often say, people say we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I say, no, we're animals trying to have a human experience.
Yeah.
And of course, it's all spiritual. I know that. But you're describing your experience of that level of connectedness to nature, our true mother, Pachamama, is something we've so lost track of here. And I personally think that having lost track allows us to do indescribable things to each other.
Yeah.
And if there was that deeper chord of contact with our true mother, then we couldn't ever do the things that we do to each other, like you're witnessing right now with the Brazilian government.
Yeah. And, you know, it sounds silly and abstract, but I'm only speaking from a personal experience, because I feel like we've all gone our lives having to build up barriers and numb ourselves to a lot because we're bombarded every day.
Sure.
But through our dedication to ourselves and our healing and our practice, like what happens whenever you are actually laying on the earth, like the raw ground, and it feels the same as if you're being held by your mother, like for real, and you're being, you know, it's almost like you're breastfeeding again. It's like that intimate, and that emotional experience, it's something that's actually available to all of us. And you know, we talk about this, you know, the abstract of the mother and whatnot, but like, what does it mean to actually feel that? You know, whenever we get back in touch with our hearts enough to where that is available to us emotionally,
to
and
literally embody that experience.
right.
You know, no, you're right on it. You're right on it. You know, you're bringing me down a path in a way that I was not at all planning to go down here. And I'll just give it a very quick sentence or two, which is that in my work in holistic psychotherapy and counseling, I had the realization long ago as an environmentalist since my early teens that what is really missing in the larger understanding of human psychology is our relationship with Mother Nature. And needless to say, Freud and Adler and Jung and Reich and all wonderful, smart psychoanalysts and psychologists talk about our relationship with our personal mother, but I call her our local mother, But then there's our global mother, our
Yeah.
universal mother, which ultimately is the eternal feminine, but a little bit more locally is Mother Earth. And that the real way to measure our own health as human beings and our own maturity is what is our relationship with Mother Earth. Not
Mm,
just our mother, mommy, but Mother Earth, mommy. And you basically spoke that in,
yeah.
what you were saying. So talk a little bit about, if you would, Samarpan, uh, your own experience. You had a serious wound yourself,
Yeah.
and you broke your back, and some serious, trauma. Talk
Yeah.
about that and how you feel that's getting healed,
Mm,
and its relationship to the work you're doing with the indigenous people.
yeah. So it all started. I was a martial artist since I was 5 years old. And by the time I was, my around 11 or 12, I was like a second-degree black belt. I was competing in tournaments, and that evolved into me being a wrestler, and was combining those two things into a mixed martial arts kind of profile of expression. And I was invited to join an MMA team around the age of 16. And right when that happened, I was in practice, and I was drilling some takedowns, and I lifted up and twisted somebody, and the forces combined to where my L5S1 disc just exploded, and I fractured a vertebra, and I was essentially disabled in that moment. My father is a medical doctor who is like a mentor and role model to me, and his specialty is pain management. He was an anesthesiologist as well, but his focus is the spine. And I had all the types of shots and epidurals. I did everything except for surgery, essentially. And it just wasn't enough to really to help me. So then I had to go seek alternatives if I wanted to not be a 16-year-old with an artificial disc. And so I went to a chiropractor. It helped me tremendously. Over the years, I discovered yoga, which amplified the success and really brought in the mindful and emotional component to my healing. And again, whenever I went to Brazil for the Indigenous Games, and I got to go spend time in that tribe with the Iwalapaji people, I got to see the grander communal healing aspect of what shamans do for their people, the interrelated nature, natural relationship that we have with our environment, how it's reflected back to us through the internal and external circumstances that we're experiencing. And so when I was 18, I had that traumatic brain injury from a skateboarding accident, and bled in 6 places in my brain, lost my sense of smell and taste before it was commonplace. And
Or it was popular.
yeah, before it was in. And I confronted my own mortality at 18, and got to die before I died, so to speak. And
Hmm.
those parts of my journey have been essentially what has guided me to understand how to heal myself, and by doing so, discovering the richness of the medicine of what movement provides us, which is something that is so integral to indigenous ways of life, of moving and using your body. There are very, very, very deeply rooted emotional components to our healing, and how that expresses itself in our emotional bodies, which reflects in our physical bodies. There's a lot of indigenous cultures that don't even actually have words for physical ailments. There's the physical, I hit my knee on the tree kind of thing. But a lot of the ideology is that there's a spiritual and emotional
Right.
trauma or pathology that's expressing itself through your physical body. So
Do you speak the language of the Yanomami?
I speak Brazilian Portuguese.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm learning Yanomami. It's a
Oh,
process. There's like 16 dialects, but yeah. So I think really what it has been for me is not only going through my own healing journey, but realizing how colonized our medical system is. I mean, this pandemic has illuminated quite a lot in regards to the rigidity of the medical world, the intensity to which we rely on certain things outside of ourselves to save us, and the personal responsibility of reclaiming the innate healing capacity of your body. has almost been dismissed as pseudoscience. And that's why I commend the work of people like Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. Zach Bush for integrating and just having just a basic conversation of the actual biologically clear and laboratory confirmed results of what it means to be connected to your emotional, your mindful, and your spiritual aspects of yourself. And it's funny because we think we're discovering something, and we're really just rediscovering something that has always been present in our lives. It's just,
knowledge.
Yeah. So it's as we go deeper into our healing path, we realize what serves us, and we can offer it back to the world in a way that gives others a shortcut back to themselves. And, you know, it's the whole thing. We're walking each other home always. And so my intention through any modality that I teach or anything that I do is to remind you that I'm just a humble servant of being a translator for the messages your body is saying. That's basically what I've been trained in, is to decipher messages of the body. And I am in no way going to be the sole salvation of your body. I will give you and teach you and empower you, because that's what doctor translates from Latin as teacher. So if I can teach you something that gives you the means to fish instead of me giving you the fish, and it gives you the reminder that if you just dedicate time to yourself and you really carve that out into your life and make it a foundation that you build the rest of your life off of, that's your health and wellness, then you are going to be a healthy person. And whenever you channel the unlimited capacity of what your mind and heart connection can do to heal, I mean, there's literally nothing that you can't heal from completely. And there's the art of diagnosing should always be one of a transient label, to label something long enough for it to serve you, to then release it. So I feel that there's a lot of growth available to us in our medical sovereignty. And that's what my mission is here. That's why it's called the Yanomami Healthcare Sovereignty Project. It's not to give them the medical system that we have inherited. It's to discover how we can support each other and relearning our unlimited capacity to heal ourselves, our community, and our planet.
Beautiful, beautiful. I so commend your work, and I so agree. The words out of your mouth, I could have spoken some of them. I loved your use of the word rigid and rigidified to describe the current medical system and its approach to the entire so-called pandemic also. And the denial of the role of nature and the role of mind. I have written about this and spoken about it extensively for the past couple of years. I did before that, but it needed to be really, really driven home in these past couple of years with such reliance on externals and the total denial of the power of nature and the power of ourselves. I tell people all the time, the body is designed to heal. That's what it does. That's its job, to heal, which means to make whole, which means that it's taking disparate parts and healing, resolving, making one and letting go of the toxins. And that's on every single level, as you well put it, you know, physical, emotional. And it's not a surprise that in the Yanomami culture, there isn't a word for distinguishing between a physical body and an emotional body, or mental body for that matter, or spiritual body. There are other cultures and languages that don't understand what the heck any of that means. And I think that's a very healthy thing.
Yeah.
You
and
know?
it's interesting. There's a book called The Sky is Falling, and it's by David Kopinawa, who is he's one of the major human rights advocates. That's a Yanomami person that arose to meet the challenges of the 1980s and 90s gold rush that was in their territory, and it's still continuing to this day. And he talks about his life and the concepts of the spiritual realms that he works in as a shaman for his people. And the one of the most interesting things to me is how he speaks about their life before even the ideas of our culture entered into their realm, and just the purity of their conscious landscape of that. And how whenever the first white people showed up, how the idea of us even existing shifted their whole reality. The idea of materials and things shifted their entire, the way that they interacted with reality, period.
Yes.
And so it's
Oh, that's so fascinating.
yeah, just the pureness of what that was before. And like, granted, like the jungle and the life in the jungle is rough, you know, like the Yanomami people are very intense and have a reputation for being quite warlike people, but it's equally balanced with their capacity to be loving, caring, and present human beings with each other. And it's a whole nother story around surrounding the anthropology of how we've essentially interacted with indigenous cultures, because we're filtering it through our lens. And the word primitive comes up so many times. And it's only a comparative term for us to feel that we're looking down on someone and not seeing them eye to eye. Because if we were to see them for the equals or even grander than ourselves in certain aspects, it would cause such a deep reflective introspection that it would confront some of the axioms or the false beliefs that we've had to build up our entire personas, our psychology, our culture off of.
So I do.
Yeah.
I have enjoyed and been honored to receive plant medicine in the depths of the Amazon. I understand.
Yeah.
As well as in the depths of New York City.
Oh, wow. Yeah, those messages are clear and you can't forget those. It's programmed into your DNA. And that's actually how this whole thing started. It started as a vision from a ceremony. And I didn't know what the context was. And then literally a week later, the Yanomami showed up where I was in the middle of the rainforest and told me that they wanted me to participate in this mission for them. So it wasn't even I joke about it. I don't feel like I have a choice in what I'm doing. You know, there's something happening through me, and I'm very grateful to be in a position to be a conduit for whatever grace is being extended through me, and it's all through the lens of humility and gratitude.
Oh, I hear you, and you're underscoring a very important point that even despite our outer garb, including our culture, language, concepts of reality, etc., habitat, we as a human species and we as sentient beings on the planet, in the universe, are interconnected. We're truly one. And I'm not saying that glibly. Your experience is testament to that reality, that messages are sent on levels that are invisible, nonverbal, but meaningful, and link all of us together in this seamless way, whether we're from the Amazon or we're from the United States or New York City. It doesn't matter. And there's this magnificence in that human connection. And it makes us cry all the more that we would do mad, insane things to each other. And so hence the work you're doing to keep alive and sustain and bring love back to people who have been so abused is just, truly you have awakened the heart of many people who connect to the lungs of the earth, no less. It's not, I don't know if there's such a thing as just another forest, but of all forests, this rainforest, the Amazon, as one of the two lungs of the whole planet that sustains all life everywhere, we don't know how to thank you enough, Samarpan. So why don't you let us know what you need, let our audience know what they can do, how they can contribute. I know you're looking to put together a team of integral healthcare, holistically minded, energy minded healers that might want to go with you. Just tell us a little bit about what you have in mind and a way of reaching you.
Of course. Yeah. So as exciting, this is the call to action. So I reach out in this moment to any aligned and open-minded individuals that really see themselves as masters of their craft in ways that can really contribute to a holistically integrated team that has the capacity to look beyond cultural bias and see things for as they truly are. Basically, the way that we're structuring this is since I have returned, I've been traveling around the world and studying under different doctors and looking into different resources and organizations that would be able to have the capacity to understand what's really happening. There are agricultural components to this, since we're addressing malnutrition. So we're looking for integrated, agricultural specialists that understand soil quality, understand specifically tropical climates and being able to work amongst those kind of lands. We're calling in, medical doctors, and other professionals that have a deeper understanding of the OBGYN component of things, since we've mentioned the maternal aspect of this, but also expanding into endocrinology, internal medicine, and gastroenterology. We're also building out this in a way that we're able to structure educational elements into it. So people that have an understanding of how to translate different concepts into practical applications. And again, just being able to have people on the ground who have the capacity to perform physical examinations, possibly help with laboratory sampling. We're going to be taking water samples of their rivers to be able to quantify the degree to contamination that they have from the mercury of the gold mines. And all of this is essentially culminating in a way that we are going to, in our best intentioned way, find the root causes that are actually addressable. And so I have partnered with some friends of mine in the United Nations recently who are open to receiving this primary data as a testimony to being able to file official human rights complaints against the various governments that are involved and organizations that are perpetuating this violence against them. So this first primary trip is going to be very important as to how we really fine-tune the presentation of this data, quantifying it, really refining it in a way that is a clear message of this is an ongoing genocide against these people. And so as we really go in and find these different aspects of what is addressable through our direct actionable means, that's where, the funding from different organizations can come in and can fund this research initially. So we're reaching out to any and all practitioners that feel aligned with that kind of work, that have the capacity to be uncomfortable in the most beautiful place on earth. And, to be multilingual would be awesome, but it's not necessary. And to have organizations that are really dedicated to understanding that this is not just a drop off a care package mission. This is an introspective, interdisciplinary approach to sustainably giving people solutions to sovereignly explore their health on their own terms. And it's only existing as long as they need us. It's not I'm not setting up camp there and just making myself in charge. This is not a white knight situation. This is a collaborative relationship that we're building. So my email is the word doctor, DOCTOR at Chiro, CHIRO yoga, YOGA.com. Again, that's doctor at chiroyoga.com. You can also reach me on Instagram at Dr. Yoga. And so it's Dr. Chiro Yoga. And if there's any people that anyone feels that would be relative or relevant or even just supportive of this, there's the possibility for us to create a documentary about this process that's going to be able to amplify it even further. And there's just a whole bunch of other opportunities I'm sure I'm not even aware of that could be perfectly aligned for this. So if anyone feels the call, I'm here and I'm ready to receive your answer.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Samarpan buchalter. Really appreciate it. Obrigado, as we say.
De nada.
This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. I hope you enjoyed that and appreciated it as much as I did. It's so beautiful to see people like Samarpan, who is so dedicated to helping our brothers and sisters from our view, more remote areas who really need it. So thank you again. And thank you all for tuning in and listening again. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.